Hey, Elliot.
Hey, Brian.
What's the talk at the table?
Today, we are incredibly excited to be sitting down with John Harper, designer of games like Blades in the Dark, Agon, and Lasers and Feelings. I think it is not an overstatement to say that John is one of the most influential designers of tabletop role-playing games. John Harper, welcome to the show. So good to have you.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. This is a real treat for us. We're really excited.
We've been looking forward to chatting with you for a while.
To start us off, we always like to set the table of kind of what the goal of our conversation is. And I'm sure we're going to get into Blades in the Dark and Lasers and Feelings and upcoming supplements and lots of game stuff. But one of the big conversations we want to talk about is how to create a sustainable long-term career in game design. And you've been at this for some time now and with great success. And probably the longest career in game design that we've talked to on this podcast. And I'm curious what your relationship with the word sustainability is. Do you think that's something that you've found as a game designer?
Yeah, I think so. You know, it is a very niche thing, this hobby of ours. And calling it a career, I would call it that. I think it counts. I've had another career as a graphic designer and art director alongside that, but sustainability, you know, in terms of like livelihood and stuff can be challenging in its own way because we're such a small part of a smaller part of a small thing already in the indie space. So I always like to temper people's expectations. And, you know, when we talk about this kind of thing, to me, it has more to do with your life as a creator and sustaining that ability to make things as opposed to necessarily focusing on like doing it to pay the bills. They go hand in hand in a lot of ways. And being able to pay the bills with this work is great. But there are very few people who manage to make that work. So I just want to set that up front to say like the creative life, sustainable creative life is something that I care about a lot. And I have been doing it for a long time. Mainly I'm old, but secondarily, a lot of things happened just serendipitously. I moved to Seattle in 1993 and was part of the Talaslanta email list, an old game that Wizards of the Coast had revived. And my friends and I had played the original edition in the 80s. And the creator of that game, Steve Secchi, was on the email list. And so I got involved with him and everyone was making fanzines and stuff like that. And Seattle in 93 was a kind of important time and place for this hobby. And Wizards and Peter Atkinson especially was fostering all these new designers and designs. Jonathan Tweet was doing Everway, and Robin Laws, outside of Wizards, was making Feng Shui, and Rob Hainsou was working at Wizards before they had D&D. He went on to, Jonathan did 3rd edition, Rob did 4th edition, and you know, these people were looking for playtesters, and they were on the email lists, and they were fans of Talaslanta, and so it just so happened that the fan thing that I was into at the time as a roleplay designer was also part of this ecosystem of people that went on to have careers and went on to kind of set the stage for the hobby growing in a lot of ways. So that really let me start to treat it more like, not a job necessarily, but like doing stuff outside of just making stuff for my home game group. There was an audience there to make things for and a community to join into. The Talaslanta community was already really supportive and great, and the Usenet, RPG Usenet folks back then, John Kim and people like that were really supportive too. But everything changed when it was like not just for my group size. It was hundreds of people and then thousands of people giving feedback and getting excited about it and being able to support other designers going to their playtests and giving feedback. And kind of, it quickly became this, I don't know, like, it sounds a little pretentious to say, but kind of like this salon kind of environment.
No, that feels right.
It was everyone's passion. And we were all, it was still a small group of people. It was probably like a dozen people plus the game groups. So we could really communicate directly with each other, you know, sit around at the bar and have a drink and talk about, okay, how are we going to deal with this thing in our design? In the last session, when you did that, I thought that was really interesting. Why did you make that decision? Like all of that stuff we could really dig into. So all through the 90s and towards 2000s-ish, I was really lucky to know a lot of those people and have support from all of those people. And the web was happening, so publishing became a lot easier. You could just put stuff on a website and I didn't have to take out a second mortgage to print books and stuff. So that was another serendipitous thing. It just all kind of happened around the same time. My business partner back then, Jonathan Elliot, and I, we published our first game on the web. I think it was in '96. We had a web design business, which was, we knew how to write HTML and I could use Paint Shop Pro. So, but again, that was this slightly larger step from hobby gaming and home group stuff to like, I'm putting stuff out there. Jared Sorensen had just put out, I think Pumpkin Town or something like that on his website. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, hang on, you can just do that. You don't have to print zines or anything. So that was huge. And long story short, I met Clinton Dreisbach now, who at a game store, he was a co-founder of The Forge, lived in Seattle back then. And, you know, that whole thing went, I'm sure the Forge story has been told, but that was another big part of it. And that allowed us to create those industry connections with John Tynes and Pagan Publishing here in Seattle helped us. We published a 4th edition of Talislanta as our first project in 2000. And that went really well. The Talislanta community was awesome, and the creator helped us out. And it was kind of this whole arc from like 93 to 2000 to 2001 of we're game publishers. And me and my business partner back then were both like, I'm really burned out. I don't want to do this professionally anymore.
That's familiar.
Yeah.
Well, it's good that, you know, I think it says a lot that you're talking about feeling burnt out in 2001. We're 2024 and you're still here doing it. So I think that speaks to a lot of kind of what we want to get at today. And there's 3 things you brought up in there that I think are maybe kind of the angles we can go at this idea of sustainability with. One, I like that you separate this idea of like creative sustainability and business sustainability or career sustainability. And then there's this other word in there of community. And I think that, you know, the community around RPGs is very different now. And you mentioned The Forge, and for context, I went full-time in game design at the top of this year. I've been trying to make it work. And the community is obviously a very different sort of thing, but I've heard these sort of, you know, whispers and legends of this era of like the Forge game design, you know, forums and the like. How would you describe, like, I guess, first of all, the community of RPGs in the aughts? And how was community so important to that kind of, you know, journey towards sustainability for you?
There were 2 big parts of it. Just to sort of put a button on that Talislanta thing, we kind of retired the company that had made those books or handed it off in a way so that people could keep doing it. And then Jonathan and I both ended up with these other careers for 20 years after that. And I kept doing it on the side as a hobby thing, but like being a publisher thing was over for us at that time. But with The Forge and Story Games, Story-Games, the old forum, which is very sadly gone, it was a huge deal because The Forge was an actually moderated, like for real moderated forum. Ron Edwards and Clinton were the moderators, and they took that very seriously. And so it was possible to have very productive conversations around either game design theory or nuts and bolts design work. Like, here's the thing I'm working on. And off-topic conversations were sequestered elsewhere and ruthlessly moderated. And not only that, but like content moderation too. Like, somebody would come in and be like, hey, you're just rambling about stuff here. This has not, I see what you're trying to get at, but like, basically I'm giving you a C on this, go back and rewrite it. And like, come back with something more useful here.
Oh man, I want that. I want that so bad.
And it was so heavily moderated that a lot of people got driven away from that, but it was like getting a degree in tabletop game design, essentially. Like it was almost like we had a professor that was like, you know, paying attention, not one, but a bunch of them. And that ultimately led to, there were a bunch of sub-forums of The Forge, and they got really squirrely and philosophical, and game theory stuff there got weird, which is fine because everyone was kind of trying to explore. But ultimately, all the sub-forums got shut down and archived. They're still there. You can go find them. And only one sub-forum was left. And this is really important, I think, to the topic we're talking about here. And that was it's called Actual Play. That's one of the places where that phrase comes from. Because so many people would try to talk about design or theory and say, well, it seems like this could happen under these conditions with these type of players, and it might be the case that such and such, and it could be this and it could be that. And finally, the moderation always came down to go and play it and tell us what happened. Just let's stop all this, theorizing in the dark. So everything was focused on what you really did when you really played it. And that suddenly just unlocked this avenue of game design that for me, I've done ever since and had been doing before that without really calling it that too. But this idea that you play to design, you take the thing to the table and do the work there with the playtesters. You go away, you work on it, but it's really driven by that actual play side of things. And so the Forge really was like the sort of educational component, the getting a, I think Clinton at one point like estimated based on the number of words we had typed and the time we spent. It was like getting a master's degree. It was what we all went through there.
Right, sure.
But then the story game side was the really important other component, which was the sort of fun community side of things. Show up, share your stories, hang out. It's not heavily moderated. It's fun. We talk about movies, whatever. And those relationships, personal relationships, got created there. So when I went to Gen Con, I knew like 50 people that I had never met, but like we had built that rapport and that community of people in a social way. Both of those things together made that longevity or sustainability of the practice so much better because it wasn't me alone in a room looking at a document and going, what do I do? There was just so much support and love and friendship that came out of that because it was still it was a small enough group that you could know everyone of that generation of makers and really bond and keep those bonds. And to this day, still, like some of those people are my best friends. And so when someone asked me about that today, like, how do I do it now? That's very tricky because the space is much bigger and there's a lot more people and there's a lot more channels and noise to the signal ratio. But it seems like people who do find those smaller communities, a Discord or whatever, where it is small enough where you can make those kind of connections, that seems to still be like part of the key to it, I think.
That is the thing that like finding those communities is so hard because to create a good community it doesn't necessarily require something to be heavily moderated, but it does need to be, safe and managed and taken care of.
Yes.
And that kind of labor is always unpaid. Like that, there's never anyone who is like getting to do that as their career. That is something you have to do for the love of it. And it's hard to find people willing to do that.
Yes.
And so anytime a space like that exists, you got to like jump on it and support it and make sure that it stays there for as long as it can.
Yeah. And it's kind of magical in a way. By that, I mean, it's hard to rely on or control or anticipate. Like one community might survive and then these people show up and shepherd it and take people under their wing and create the next generation of moderators or whatever. And it just happens. And another one that seems promising just disappears. And that is not something you can just decide like I'm going to make this work. Communities, they form and break apart according to the very complex things that are beyond casual hobbyist level kind of stuff. And when it does happen, it's amazing. The Blades Discord, I think, is an incredible place that's gone through that process of having these really good stewards that have kind of brought on another round and another round and another round. And I had nothing to do with that. That's all those people do and all of that hard work. In fact, I kind of stay away from the Blades Discord, to be honest. Like they don't need me looking over their shoulder. Like they're doing their thing and they're doing great work. And that's just kind of a fortunate thing. It could have gone otherwise. So yeah, I don't know. I understand. I empathize with the frustration of people today saying like, what do I do? How do I find my community? It's tricky.
It's interesting. There's a question here I'm trying to put words to, but I feel like these sort of key lessons from this era that you're talking about of like, go play and tell us what happened. Those are things that feel very like they have embedded themselves into the DNA of like game design thought and game theory now, like as like somebody who's come into it in the last few years. And I have to imagine that you must feel like a shepherd for that in some way with things like Blades and with things like taking Blades and deciding to make it like a Forged in the Dark SRD. And obviously that wasn't the first SRD, but like what was it about turning Blades into an SRD that was so important about passing some of these kind of lessons on that you got a master's degree online to learn?
Yeah. Part of it was kind of paying it forward because I had received so much from other people who were generous with their work and their permissions that I felt like it made sense to just, I didn't want to be the terminator point there. Like, I wanted to just keep going and like, okay, you did all this work that helped me make stuff, and now I've done all this work and I can just hand it off to somebody else and they can use it to make their thing. Because it is that again, that community aspect extends beyond personal relationships or forum memberships and stuff. It is also the larger community that people that I'll never meet or talk to, but they're still part of that space of either RPG designers or players or podcasters or whatever it is, and contributing to that larger body of work in a way that lets people use it in a kind of supportive way. Because people can use your mechanics. You can't copyright your mechanics, It's not really about that. It's more about kind of setting this expectation that it's desirable for you to do this. You should take this and build on it and make something new. And Fate had already done that. The Fate SRD was a big deal when it happened. And Fate comes from a game called Fudge, which was a thing from Usenet. Rob and Fred had kind of hacked down to this single page, one page Fudge, and that turned into Fate. And Stefan O'Sullivan, the guy who made Fudge, he had already started with the first document of Fudge, had a little thing at the bottom that said like, this is free for you to use. I think it even said like, you're allowed to photocopy this at the copy shop or whatever. If they ask you, it's okay. And that kind of permission stuff. So yeah, when I came into those communities, it was already kind of expected that we were going to share with each other, essentially.
It's great when enough of the big games and the core games put an SRD out or make that such a standard, like having a standard of sharing or an expectation of community. Because these bigger games are doing it, it feels like that is the expectation for this community as a whole, which is really nice to see that like more and more people like become game designers, that's the standard. That's the litmus test they look to pass.
Yeah. I think some of those big players got kind of shamed into it during the events of the last couple of years, but
yeah, it's okay.
It's good to see it. Good to see it regardless.
Well, so the other direction I want to take this a bit is like this idea of what you said of creative sustainability before we get into something like business sustainability. And I think there's a number of ways to go with this, and I think like maybe the broadest sense is like, what does the John Harper of today think of as like tenets of quote unquote good design or quote unquote successful design, like creatively?
That's an interesting question. Like from a creative standpoint, I think the first element that comes to mind for me is this sort of internal component where you're doing the work, whatever it is, prepping for game night or making a game or making art for it or whatever it is. It's coming from a place of making something for yourself. You're motivated to do or driven to do or whatever it is. But first and foremost, it's something that like you want to do because you want to do it, because it's a creative expression that you want to do. It's not a chore. It's not a task to tick off a box. That stuff will come later. You're not going to get away from that. If you try to make products, you're going to have those times where you just have to do a thing, whether you're motivated to or not. And learning that skill creatively is an important thing. I didn't have that really when back in '93. I worked in creative agencies for about 20 years, and very quickly you learn like, well, you just got to make this art. I don't care how you feel about it. It's got to get done. Just do it today. And that's a useful skill. But to have something sustainable creatively, I think we're kind of talking about not burning out. And I see the path to burnout shorten when people are more motivated by more external kind of factors or expectations from other people, or comparing what they've done to other people's work or whatever. Finding that place to take joy in the process and the practice of the thing first, I think is really great. And that will help sustain that creative life. Especially if you're able to make things and set them aside and not feel like you have to finish it necessarily or share it with someone necessarily. The act of doing it was enough. because at least for my process, like I have, for everything that anyone sees, there are a dozen at least, and not just drafts, but like entirely other projects that uh, didn't go anywhere, or I realized that I do want to do it, but not right now, or, and having that space to play there and shift gears one day and do something else. And that can be tough when you have a day job and you have a limited amount of time to focus on your work. But I think just that intrinsic feeling of doing it for the love of the thing is key. You had another part to the question that now I've rambled and forgotten.
I think that the way I'd kind of rephrase maybe the second half is like, how important do you think, your own taste is to this kind of idea of creative sustainability, of like what you think is good versus successful versus like without putting the commercial good on that, like sort of the quote unquote good, the successful?
I think developing your own personal taste is really important. For a while, when asked the question of like what my job is, like you're a full-time game designer, air quotes. What is that? I used to say my job is to play games. I make them and sell them to pay my bills. So that's my like profession in that sense. But my job, and I don't totally like, this is kind of a glib answer, but I do believe it. I felt like my job was to play games because the more games you play, the more tools you have in your toolbox. You're not always reinventing the wheel. People put way too much pressure on themselves to be like, okay, I'm not going to look at anything else. I just want to I got to be original and exciting and new and different. And to me, that's just not the way art works. Like, Mozart wasn't like sitting in a silent room staring at a black wall. Like, I just have to do this with no context, like everyone's building on everyone else's work. And also, Stephen Bruce, the author, has a great bit in one of his books where these two painters are talking, and one of them says, "Oh, when I'm working on a piece, I don't like to look at other people's stuff. I don't want it to influence me." And the first guy says, "Oh, yeah, that would be terrible if I was looking at Rembrandt and that started to come out of my brush. What a horrible thing that would be. Who would want that?" So, yeah, I don't think there's any danger there of, like, I think you should be open and play as much stuff, board games, video games, everything that you can. And that will give you those tools, but also to the subject of like taste and like what's a good design or what's a bad design. Those are very subjective things, of course. There are some objectively true things you could say about something, like these numbers don't add up. It was supposed to work this way and it goes the other way. But part of playing a bunch of games and being exposed to a lot of different work and points of view and backgrounds, creative backgrounds, that's all developing taste. And you're going to have your own personal preferences and things, but there's a space, not a space, there's like a level that kind of arises out of a broad body of work that you can look at and kind of see its shape if you see enough of it. That's true of anything, like music, film, TV, games. And there's going to be these cool, weird outliers that are not bad. Even something like in film, like something like The Room, it's infamously horribly made, but it's interesting and weird, and it's entertaining. But the reason that stands out that way is because everything else kind of that rises to the level of like popular culture has a certain quality to it, sort of polish or professionalism or expertise or whatever. And that's not to say that you shouldn't make The Room. Like you should. That stuff is great. But I think it's good to expose yourself to enough stuff in whatever you're doing, music, comics, whatever, to kind of like see that bigger space, see that bigger picture, and give yourself something to aim at and skills to develop. You're going to see someone's work and go, "Oh, wow, I really like the way they do that. I want to like work to do that too. I want to develop that skill, whatever it is." The Ira Glass thing always is looming. The problem of, taste outstripping your ability. That is a thing. But I, as I recall, I haven't listened to that episode in a long time, but it's kind of a sad thing, I think, when they're talking about it. But I try to look at it as a positive thing, that it is the fact that you can see that gap is a really good sign. because it means your sort of artistic sense, your aesthetic sense is growing and developing, and the skills will come along later. But if you're not able to see that, that means that you're not. Maybe you can kind of like broaden your ideas about what's good and what's entertaining or what's fun.
It almost feels like if you erase that gap, you would lose the like delight for the thing that you like making. Like if, I don't know, I feel like if you erase that gap to zero between taste and ability, then you would lose sort of the delight and surprise of like a new thing that you see and you go, oh man, I never would have done it like that, or I couldn't have done it like that. And that makes it like so exciting for me to go and play it. Like there's almost something fun about the idea of like actually never closing that gap is good.
Yeah, I think so. And Johan Noor was talking about the visual design for Morkborg and saying like, oh, I set out to break all the rules and do everything wrong from the design school perspective. And of course, that meant that Johan created a set of design rules that Morkborg represents. But that's another functional place for that gap, is to not even always be striving to like go uphill, but to say like, oh, cool, what if I just did something that doesn't reach there, that is as lo-fi and sloppy and just slapdash as possible? What would that look like? What would it be? I love to do that. I learned that working in the creative field. Like before I had that like daily kind of grind of making stuff, I would strive for like to always produce the peak of my capabilities. And if it wasn't there, then I would just keep working on it. And my friend Jonathan was like, no. Here's what you do. Once you have a certain like level of ability, you can ride the bike or whatever, you're not always falling off. Do the fastest version you possibly can first, and then look at it. And if that's good enough, you're done and you can go to the next thing. And what will probably happen is you'll do the fastest version possible, come back to it the next day and go, oh, well, obviously these two things are wrong. And if I fix them, then it's going to be good now. But you still shortened that window way down. Or on the topic of what we're saying now, like what you might find is you've invented something new or discovered something new in your work because you didn't labor over it and try to constantly like, grow and level up every time you make something. These are kind of contradictory statements, but
which feels very of the kind of stuff we're talking about. And I'm reminded of another thing Johan said when we chatted with him, which was like there was a period of time where he would make himself make a drawing every day. Mm-hmm. Not a good drawing, just something that he could call complete. And then he put a whole section of them in his art book, and they speak so much to like kind of things he was like just able to experiment around with. And then he talks about how some of those ended up being licensed because he just put them on, social media to be like, oh, this doesn't matter. Like I did it. It's out.
Yeah, that's really good.
I've always thought about the artists that I most admire don't talk about their work in like an elevated way of like, oh, it's art and, I labor over it for a long period of time. It's like, no, they're craftsmen. They're tradesmen. They are people who have to, like, as you said, you have to do it when you don't want to do it. You have to do it when you have a headache. You've got to get it out. And by just that slow churn of just doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it and putting it out and putting it out and putting it out, you can't help but get better by just trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing. And your failures just get higher and higher up the mountain.
Yeah, I like the idea of craftsmanship and art making. I think there's a huge amount of overlap there, and the product of the crafter is art, and the product of the artist can be craft. Some people have a divide around like utility or usefulness, that art doesn't need to be useful or something like that. I think that's too fine a definition. They all overlap, but kind of being aware of those modes, I think, is great to be able to say like, yeah, I'm gonna be a craftsperson today and like just get something done, or fill out this whole table of random entries. I'm gonna put something in each box today. I'm gonna do that, or I'm gonna figure out my page ratio. I'm just gonna sit here and like mess around and see how wide my text box is gonna be until it is exactly what I want. But also to say like, maybe I'm putting on my art hat today and I'm just gonna improvise a song. I'm gonna just do something. I'm gonna do something expressive and free, and I'm gonna be open to whatever comes out and just let it be whatever it is. Those are two weird extremes. I don't think those are two modes. Obviously, there's a bunch of stuff in between those and all around that. But being aware of that as like the broader space in which you are doing stuff and making things as a creative person, as opposed to like a role that you have or an identity that you hold, like I'm an artist or I'm a craftsman or whatever. I think it's good to just not do that to yourself. Just think of those things as the bigger possibility space of what making stuff is, and let yourself be whatever at any time, and let the work be whatever.
Midnight Muscadines is a cozy, dark tabletop role-playing game where light and shadow intertwine in a fractured world. Players take on the roles of marmoteers, brave adventurers who journey into the untamed wilderness to collect the elusive Midnight Muscadines, craft magical jams, and protect the fragile light of Nim. Through collaborative storytelling and resourceful gameplay, players weave tales of courage, community, and the pursuit of balance. Will you preserve the light, uncover the truths hidden in the shadows, or reshape the balance of the world forever? Midnight Muscadines is perfect for fans of Studio Ghibli and Sea of Stars who seek to capture the magic of exploration and the heartfelt adventure in a world where small heroes make a big impact. Play Midnight Muscadines as a traditional GM'd game, GM-less, or even solo. Midnight Muscadines is crowdfunding now on BackerKit. Join the campaign at pandeongames.com/muscadines.
I'm Quinns of tabletop role-playing game review show Quinn's Quest, and this is Play to Find Out. Play to Find Out is an actual play podcast that brings notorious old games from the 80s and 90s back to the table. Each season of Play to Find Out, I'm joined by Emily Johnson and Rob Morgan.
Good? Nervous?
Yeah.
You both looked at each other really concerned, like you think what's about to happen is going to be unpleasant. And frankly, I think that's rude.
And together, we explore the TTRPGs of ages gone by. Our goal? To separate the TTRPGs that deserve to be remembered from those that maybe don't. I don't know, Emily. It was the 80s.
Also,
a lot of people were on cocaine. We blow the dust from decrepit systems to learn how they work. Your 100 on the encounter table bursts out. Right, you've encountered a fog. Get ready. Don't laugh.
There's one get ready for a fog.
Don't laugh. Encounter their unique quirks.
I do finger guns to cover up how I wince.
A weird thing happens as you do finger guns.
Oh no.
And I'm hoping that the Quinn's Quest community will join us in exploring these games too. If you this up, cannot describe to you how much your adventure ends here.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because the best way to learn is to play to find out. Play to Find Out is available now on the Quinn's Quest Patreon, but the first episode of each series streams for free on the Quinn's Quest YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Anyway, you failed the Earth Tech roll, and you made jokes while I was doing my exposition, so you don't get to hear any more.
Oh, no. Come on.
I was shook as...
I think the next question I'm about to ask is a little bit like trying to ask you to think in the contradiction to what you just said. But I think it's when you look over your game design career, flipping to this other perspective of using the word career, or, you said that there's some times where people would ask you what you do as a full-time game designer. And I think that the even getting to the space of saying the sentence, I am a full-time game designer, is like a very aspirational thing for a lot of people. And so I'm curious, with your journey, was there a moment where saying that felt right? And did it come like from a business sustainability feeling, or was it like a creative sustainability feeling that led to being like, okay, I can say this and feel it and mean it?
Telling people that I did that as like at a party, like, what do you do? Saying I'm a game designer, that came from the business side of things. I made my first game when I was 10 years old, a role-playing game. And so I've always done it, and in that sense, it's a full-time thing. Like I've spent my whole life doing that. But in terms of like what I want to talk to someone about, like my daily work, I didn't usually say that as like the icebreaker at the event kind of thing. But if we were talking about hobbies or fun, or what do you do for fun and stuff, like I would talk your ear off about RPGs. But for me, when I had my other career in the creative agency world, that's when I was making a lot of stuff, a lot of RPG material as free games that were mostly on story games, Lady Blackbird and stuff like that, Lasers and Feelings. And I had a Patreon too for a little while that was kind of a way to release a free game, like kind of lightly monetize it. The patrons would support the development of it, and then it would be released as a free thing. But I had a day job, and I didn't need to put out RPG products in order to sustain my livelihood. And I didn't have to treat my games as products necessarily. Lasers and Feelings is, it's a piece of paper. Lady Blackbird is also really tiny. Those could both be products. Maybe they will be someday. I have a design for a Lasers and Feelings box set, which looks really cool. I don't know if I'll ever make it, but with dice and stuff. But,
What?
Yeah. I mean, who knows if that'll ever happen? But
that should happen.
But yeah, it would be cool. But like that's making a product. Making the game was making the game, and one turns into the other or not. But because I had that day job and I worked in a creative field too, like my job afforded me time. There's some agencies are super grindy and like they work you to death. Ours was very, very light touch, and we could work on our own stuff and like be creative while we're at the office. And we had these huge, big, colorful printers we could use to make stuff for our own projects or whatever. So that helped. The people I worked with in my office were also RPG people and RPG designers. And so that was a whole other factor in it. So for a while, it was this like, I don't know what you call it, like a pro-am kind of level where it's like, it's a hobby, but I want to make stuff with some polish. I want to make it look cool, and I want to, put stuff out that people are excited about. But around 2014-ish, when the playtesting for Blades was getting really involved, and like we had already done a year of weekly sessions and we're about to go into year 2, I was like, I think this is going to be something people are into, and B, I think this might be a product that will like sell well as a product. And there had been a couple pretty successful RPG Kickstarters compared to what people do now. They were not very big, but they were shocking at the time. And I was in Sage Latour's group. They were making Dungeon World at the time, and we knew that Kickstarter was coming, or it had just happened. Yeah, it had just happened around that time, and that had done well. And I was thinking about retiring from the art director business, and I kind of just put that in my to-do list to just say like, okay, I'm going to turn this thing into a product and see what happens. And what I like to say about the transition to full-time game design for me was not deciding to do it, jumping onto that moving train and hoping it worked out. It was more about like being pulled there because it was sort of sustaining itself. It justified itself in terms of like, I can quit my job kind of way. So that Kickstarter, the number on that Kickstarter was essentially the do I quit my job or not number. And if it had turned out differently, then I wouldn't have. But it crossed that threshold where I looked at the number and was like, okay, this week I can do this, and not have to immediately like be in some kind of dire scenario where I got to put out my next thing or whatever. So yeah, it was a decision that I made it ahead of time, that it was something I wanted to do, but that decision to actually like transition to full-time as my livelihood was just a matter of adding up the numbers, and so they made sense. And fortunately for me, Blades has continued to sell well, and it has sustained itself in that sense over time, where I've been able to work on a bunch of projects in the background and develop new systems, and spent a couple of years making Agon Wish on Nittner, which then is its own SRD now with Deathmatch Island is out, using that system, and there's some other stuff coming too. And Blades kind of being an overall success, especially for an indie, allowed me to not have to do the usual thing, which is like, okay, I'm going to do a supplement per quarter now to support my game system, or I need to come out with the next, splashy product that helps sustain this. And if Blades had if those numbers had been different, then again, I would have made different decisions. If it had an initial surge and then fell off, I would have done something else. It's kind of driven by just the fact of paying the rent. That's part of it.
Why do you think that Blades in the Dark has had so much staying power since it was released? Like, it is kind of the top game that I always get recommended first after D&D. It's like D&D is the thing. What's the next thing people say? It's very often Blades in the Dark. Why do you think it's had so much staying power?
I see that sometimes from game RPG YouTubers and stuff. I follow a fair number of the D&D creators, Bob Worldbuilder and Jenny D and Dungeon Coach, and some of those people. I like their channels. And since the OSR sort of scandal thing, they've been talking about indie games a lot more. And they will, even those people who are deeply entrenched in the D&D culture will say something like, "Oh yeah, I heard you in the comments. I'm supposed to look at Blades in the Dark. I heard you," which is always great to hear, and that's cool. They're aware of it, but I feel like a lot of the time that's either coming from indie community people that are excited that this broader space is interested in the indie space, or with Blades in particular. I think if people have played the most traditional RPGs, D&D type things, or especially Shadowrun or something along those lines, Blades was kind of made to address a lot of the pain points of those games, because when we were playtesting and developing it, we ran into those pain points that you always do when you try to do something like a heisty game with a crew of people working together. And so we tried to just sand off all of those rough edges. And I think if you come to Blades for having felt those pain points before and you play it, you go, "Oh, I got to tell everyone about this. You don't have to go through that pain, everybody." There's a way to do it without the pain points. And I think that's helped evangelize the game a lot. Plus, it's an easy sell. Like, you're criminals pulling heists in a weird haunted city.
Yeah.
That it's not complicated to explain it.
Got a great one sentence.
Yeah. And for on the flip side, that turns people off because it's just so one note. They're kind of like, "Well, how long can you play that? Like, I want the game that I can play forever and do anything and go anywhere." And like, great. Yeah, there's plenty of games for you to do that. But again, for people who've burned out trying yet again to start a D&D campaign that goes for 4 sessions and ends, they're like, "Yeah, no, that's fine. Let's play Blades in the Dark. It does this one thing, and we'll play 10 sessions of it, and we'll have fun, and that, it'll be great." So it's another sort of evangelism point, I think. And there's a bunch of indie games that have that model that I think a lot of indie designers are designing into that space of, okay, what has been a problem for me when I've played other RPGs, and what can I do to solve, problem X?
So there's something you said in there of like, because of how the game did, you didn't have to immediately become this model of, I am making supplements for this game, in perpetuity every quarter. But as we sort of talked about a little on mic, and you've teased, or a little bit off mic, and you've teased on social media, there's a supplement for Blades coming soon, or by the time this releases, may be available for folks. Why was now the right time for that?
It really is just a question of like the back burnery things coming to the front burners. I've had this project on the back burner for 4 years or so, and we can get into what it is a little bit too. But part of what it is more lore of the setting that is stuff that I've developed just through play. A lot of it, everyone, when they play Blades in the Dark, they interpret all the bits and pieces a little bit differently and include things in their own ways. And then ultimately you kind of see these empty spaces and you start to fill them with your own stuff. And over time, I've collected a bunch of that just by running the game and playing the game, and have this document that was kind of like, what do I want to do with all this stuff? Should some of these things be new crew types? Should it be like a score that I put up on give away as PDF or something. And in combination with the lore and setting, and there's like technology stuff, there's also the rules side of things where just by writing the game, you naturally like grow and develop the rules and change things. And there's a whole chapter in Blades. Chapter 9 is called Changing the Game, and it has a series of instructions about how to house rule it and how to create new systems and how to modify systems. And I don't see a ton of that in the community, in the Blades in the Dark community. There is some. I'm not to say that there's none. In the Forged in the Dark design community, there's tons and tons of cool iterations on all of that stuff. But when I watch people play, like actual plays and stuff of Blades, they tend to be pretty like strict with what the book says and follow the rules, and which is great. But I have a little bit of frustration sometimes where I'm like, there's a whole chapter. You can just change it. You don't have to do this thing that it seems to be annoying you. You should just change it. I know you hate the healing rules, so just don't, just change them because it's
changing
really
the
bothering
rules
you. I can
are
tell.
in the rules. You can
Exactly.
do that.
You're following the rules if you change the rules. So this supplement, it has come from this stuff I've collected over the years, different ways to play, different materials to use, and I finally figured out like we were saying before, like how is this a product as opposed to a bunch of stuff that I made. So it's called Blades in the Dark Deep Cuts, and it's two parts. The first part is the technology setting. There's 27 factions and 100 heritage and background options that flesh out all the different regions, Skovlin and Neruvia, and give you like more specific stuff to work with if you come from different places. There's a catalyst, which is this, I'm calling, hopefully other Blades designers will pick up on this and run with it, but it's a thing to drop into your game. It's like a world-changing thing that affects everyone. It affects the factions, it affects the crews. It's a way to just sort of like kick off. You could start a new series with this catalyst if you've played it before and you want to do something different, or you could just drop it like a bomb into your current game and see how people react and what the results are. I won't go into it necessarily because I think some players will want to discover that and play, not have me just explain it right now, but it's kind of a big thing, a big deal. So that's the first half of the book is all this setting material and the new technology. There's like cool new innovations because the setting is supposed to be this industrial age of invention. And so when I run the game, I like to always have some new weird thing that's on the streets that people are messing with, or like a crackpot inventor has created something, or there's a new company that has come into existence that has the galvanic typograph that can like take dictation, and because there's a ghost trapped inside it and it can like type, or whatever. I love to add that kind of stuff to the game. And I've collected a bunch over the years, so I was like, okay, we'll put that in here too. And then the second half is the rules modules. There's six rules modules that are all sort of plug and play. You can use them all or just drop one in, swap out this deep cuts downtime system for the one you're currently using, or there's harm and trauma rules you can switch out, or character advancement, stuff like that, and a new action roll thing.
Oh, whoa.
It's something that replaces the action roll, actually. I did some videos last year kind of talking about the action roll on my YouTube channel and kind of how to, like, best practices for using it. And before I did that, I kind of went back and read that chapter again in Blades and was like, yeah, okay, that does pretty much say this, but I see people online playing sometimes, and they're kind of not doing this. The text isn't hitting with everyone, it's not like catching. So I made the video to kind of be like, this is what this means. Here's how you do it. And in the process of writing the script for that video, I wrote the threat roll, essentially, which is in deep cuts. It's essentially taking the action roll through the lens of that video I made and just making it the rule. So it's kind of the same thing. It's just a different way to think about it. Primarily solving the issue of coming up with consequences after the roll is something that people struggle with. So this removes that problem. So that's, I think, something that people will be into. So it's about 125 pages, it turns out. And yeah, I'm very, very happy with it. It's got new art and stuff. And
sounds fucking great.
It's been a back burner thing. And then I spent the last 5 months or so, I looked at it and was like, this is kind of almost done. I should finish this and put it out.
Just do this. I should check out. Okay, I've done the fun stuff.
Yeah, right.
Now I'll check off all the boxes.
I'm sort of struck by this parallel to like what you talked about, like at the start of this conversation with these online communities about like that shift in direction from let's stop theorizing and let's go play to find out the design, play to design. And like this is kind of the big version of that. Like you've gotten, 7 years of play to design the things that you didn't know about Blades in the Dark when it came out. So
Yeah,
it's a really fun full circle.
it is. Yeah, that's totally what it is. All this stuff that's come from play that now can kind of be put back into the thing itself. And it's kind of a coincidence that at the same time, Tim Denay is making Blade 68, which is a supplement book set 100 years in the future of Duskwall. And it's sort of like the 60s espionage version of the game with psychic agents and stuff. It's really amazing. And so that's getting close to being done. And there'll be a public playtest, I think, pretty soon. And Dagger Isles is in public playtest right now, the Dagger Isles supplement, and that'll be coming out soon. So we didn't have a big calendar on a wall saying like, okay, 2024 is the year of Blade supplements, but it just worked out that way. Everyone's process kind of gelled right at the same time. And now it's up to Evil Hat to kind of like make sure all the ships don't stack up too much. They gotta, figure out when stuff comes out and all of that. But it's cool. It's exciting. It's the kind of thing that it exists because we all are excited about it, not because it's really needed. Like, it's not the type of game that needs supplements. Everything's in the book that you need to play. But at the same time, especially looking out across like the fan community, if you go on itch or whatever, and there's like hundreds of playbooks and scores and all this stuff people have made for the game, which is amazing. So yeah, I guess maybe I'm joining into that part of the community now. I'm going to be a Blades in the Dark like fan material maker now too.
I mean, it's again back to full circle of like, if the career starts with fanzines and making things for the love of it, that's kind of where you're at again, making more things for the things you love.
That's true. Yep.
Man, this is just reminding me that we have a Blades in the Dark campaign that we haven't played in like a month and a half because we've gotten all of us in the campaign have gotten really busy. And now I just want to play it again.
Just want to get back to it. Yeah. Maybe with some new rules.
Yeah, you'll have new stuff to use if you want.
Drop a catalyst in.
So John, when you look at, this full circle we just talked about of like, the aughts to now, from Blades in the Dark when it first launched to now, in the interest of paying it forward for sort of our designers in the audience, like when it comes to sustainability, and you can choose any of the kinds of sustainability we've talked about, whether that's community or creative or business, what's kind of like maybe the biggest piece of advice you would give to someone who is either starting now or searching for sustainability now and like maybe been going at it for a bit?
If it's specifically designer in the sense of like designing an RPG system, writing a book, that kind of thing, the first most important thing, it would be your home group, your playtest group. If you don't have one, it's going to be a lot harder to do the work. Finding that group of people that's willing to put up with a new character sheet every week, and their cool power doesn't exist in the game anymore, and etc. It's so important. It's the most important thing, I think, because that lets you have a space to do the work we were talking about, to design through play, show up, see how it goes, and not just have a reliable group that you can schedule, which is its own problem. If you can do that bare minimum, that go ahead and do that. But I've been lucky enough to have playtest groups that are made of often like mostly GM oriented types and game designer types, so that it's play for play's sake and to see the game in how it operates. But then that group of people can be very good at the kind of post-session analysis part and help focus on where some stress points are, or having an insight into something that maybe you're not seeing. Like I said, I'm not saying it's easy to just magically find that group of people, but it's so valuable. Doing the work without it is a lot harder. You can still do it, but it's much, much harder. And then the other thing, well, there's a couple, I guess. One is having a kind of trusted advisor soundboard person who's not necessarily involved in the project in any way. They're not playtesting or reading it or anything. Someone you can just vent to or be like, hey, what do you think of this? Like, getting the words outside your head, and to someone who doesn't have the context, who doesn't have all the knowledge of the thing and can just sort of receive it and hear it for itself. For me, it's usually my partner, Allison, who's also a game designer and writer. And, at dinner, I'll just be like, okay, I'm going to just say this thing to you. Like, how does it hit you? That's so valuable to have that in any creative process, just to get out of your own head, to have another set of eyes. Someone with a different background, especially, is really valuable because they're going to receive things in different ways. They're going to have experiences that you haven't had, and knowledge about stuff that you don't have. So I don't mean like sensitivity reader necessarily. Like, that's something you should do later down the road for sure. But it a little bit like that, like just, getting that different perspective, I think is really, really powerful. And then for sustainability beyond that, like doing this as a sustainable hobby, or even moving into like making products and selling games, I'd go back to the original thing we said, which was that community of people, like-minded people that are excited about what you're doing. And the way that I've gotten into those communities and succeeded there has always been showing up to be the person who is like, I will play test your game. Send me the text and I'll read it and give you feedback. Ooh, I have an idea for, I got into the Forge group actually, because I met Clinton and he was about to publish The Shadow of Yesterday, and he didn't have a cover to put on the Lulu page, the print on demand thing. And so I went home that night. I made him a cover and I mailed it to him. He didn't ask me to. And he was like, oh, this is great. Oh, you should come to the next meetup and blah, blah, blah. So being that person who shows up to be the support player in the community, instead of showing up and saying, hey, everyone, I got all this stuff. Look at it for me. Do work for me. That can work. But I think a good way to start is to just be that resource for other people. And that's going to create those relationships and create that good track record where down the road you can ask for favors or recruit playtesters and stuff, because you've put your time in and helped other people out first.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize for folks, those 3 pieces of advice all have one thing in common, and they're about people and your relationships to them. Like that's kind of everything. When it comes to sustainability, you can't be an island.
Community is something you have to actively cultivate.
It's true of every creative work, I think, but our hobby is a social hobby. It is about sitting around and talking to people and creating fictional relationships with fictional people, but also interpersonal relationships with the real people. It's the core activity of what we do. So I think centering that in as part of the process makes a lot of sense.
John, thank you so much for coming on the show. Before we let you get out of here, we have one question that we always end the show with, and that is, what are you bringing to the table? And this is just our cute way of asking you to recommend anything. Could be inside of tabletop, outside of tabletop, could be a person, a game, a television show, a resource. What's something you want to share with our listeners?
That is a good question. It's hard to pick one thing. The first thing that comes to mind, I'll just go with that. I'm not going to overthink. Like, okay, what's the best use of this
What's the core
answer?
perfect thing?
Yeah.
I've got to win this question.
The first thing that came to mind was Dropout.tv. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, good. It's one of my favorite things. Samuraish and his team over there are creating this really wonderful streaming service, which is really, really affordable. And also you're allowed to share your passwords with whoever you want, which is pretty great. They make a bunch of different shows that there's like game show type things. They produce Dimension 20, which is the tabletop show. I'm sure you know that. A bunch of improv based stuff. They just started a new show called Gastronauts, which is like Chopped, but funny. So they're just going in all these different directions, but the common thread is essentially like, how do you take improv scene work and turn it into something that's digestible as a show to watch? They have a show called Make Some Noise, which is essentially a bunch of improv prompts, but kind of presented as a game show. And Game Changer, which is kind of the same thing, but they had like a Survivor season spoof and that kind of stuff. But what's cool about it, the people there are really great, wonderful people. IRL. A bunch of them are gamers and really interested in the gaming space. Ross Bryant does a lot of work with them, who's a great GM and improv and gamer guy. But the reason it came to mind right now is A, my partner and I love to watch their stuff all the time. But B, it's kind of touches on what we've been talking about, that community of people started with a group of people that were at College Humor, just a small team of people that left and started this thing and started to find these like-minded other folks in the improv and gaming spaces. And it grew sort of organically over time because of the community of people and the support systems that were there and the positive creative spaces that allowed it to grow. It wasn't a corporate machine saying, okay, we need to fill these 60 slots and this is the timeline and this is the budget and da-da-da-da-da. It started with one thing, one show, and just grew and grew because it had the support and it sort of allowed growth without it being forced. So I think they're a really cool example of the results of those kind of fostering creative relationships. And two, the more exposure, if you're not going and doing improv classes or reading Improv for Gamers, which you should read by Karen Twelves, or Play Unsafe by Graham Walmsley, those are both amazing books about how to use improv at the game table. But just watching Game Changer Make Some Noise, this kind of stuff, these really short form, like very tight prompts where it's one thing, it gets resolved, a character comes out of nowhere, says something funny and disappears. I think it's great for role players to be exposed to that kind of thing. For players to maybe let go a little bit and be spontaneous and get in the moment and play and not necessarily have to optimize or whatever all the time. But especially for GMs who need to like pick up a character for a few sentences and put them away and move on to the next thing. Seeing people do that over and over and over again, you start to see these skills and patterns start to absorb that a little bit. And I think it's a way to watch something funny and fun and also kind of like do a little brain training at the same time to maybe get better at that if that's something you're interested in.
It's a great rec.
Love that. We'll put that in the show notes. I strongly encourage you to go check it out. We both love Dropout as well. It's fantastic.
Yeah, my first thought is like, okay, what's the most obscure thing I can mention that really needs attention? And it's like, I'm gonna go down a rabbit hole of 100 things if I do that.
But you give a good lens for a beloved thing. I like that.
Bringing it back around.
I do love talking about Dropout just because of the quality of community that they've cultivated is really inspiring. Thank you so much, John, for coming to the table. Do you want to let people know where they can find you online if they're looking for you?
Yeah, I am still on the accursed hellscape of Twitter at John_Harper. And I'm also on Blue Sky, just John Harper, no underscore there. JohnHarper.itch.io is my site with my free games and my for money games. Evil Hat Productions is my publisher. They make a bunch of great stuff. So you can find my work over there as well as a bunch of other cool games. Yeah, that's me.
And keep an eye out for Deep Cuts.
Yeah, Deep Cuts. Well, it should be out when you hear this episode. You should be able to go get it.
We will put all those links in the show notes, so it's really easy to find everything. And if you want more gaming content from us, you can check out the 20-sided newsletter and go to the Many-Sided Media Discord server. We'll be talking about all of this stuff and more. Those are both going to be linked in the show notes below. As always, rate, review, and follow Talk at the Table wherever you get your podcasts. And that's what the table is talking about. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.